Hurricane advisory tonight is warning of life-threatening storm surge and catastrophic flooding. Ian caused significant damage today in Cuba, flattening homes and knocking out power to the entire island. It's now picking up strength over the Gulf as it heads towards the Fort Myers area. People in Florida have been boarding up, stocking up, and many getting out ahead of the hurricane. The first this season to hit the U.S. and the first to impact the Tampa area in a century.
The Sunshine State home to many snowbirds and New Yorkers who've moved to Florida full-time seeking warmer weather.
13 Wham's Carla Rogner spoke with some of our former neighbors who are preparing to take on this storm. Carla?
Yeah, that's right. Both Florida transplants I spoke with said they knew the risk of hurricane comes with making the move down there. They're anxious, but they feel prepared. Another Rochesterian is not as calm. He is in Florida on vacation and wondering how he's going to get home.
This is actually pretty calm for now, but it'll be a different story, like I say, in 15 hours or less.
That's the view outside Al Wilcox's Fort Myers home as he and his wife wait for Hurricane Ian.
We're nervous.
Yeah, they're a little nervous.
This will be their first major storm since making the move from New York. They've put up hurricane shutters and loaded up on batteries in water.
I think there's more of a risk of ending up in a traffic jam and having a hurricane hit. I think we're safer at this point to stay right here.
About an hour up the West Coast, despite evacuation orders, Nancy Bean is taking shelter at a friend's concrete house on the beach.
If it's a real sturdy house and you're high above the potential flood surge, then they're even saying, unless you really need to go, you could stay.
She moved to Florida from New York about 8 years ago, and she's learned a few things after riding out Hurricane Irma.
We got peanut butter and crackers, and so if we lose power for a period of time, we have some food to eat.
Rick Wright is a little less prepared.
Quite an adventure.
He and his wife are in Florida on a 40th anniversary trip. They've been evacuated from their hotel and finally made it to a new place near Cape Coral.
You can get warnings on your phone, but they don't really explain where are the shelters, where should you go. We have another backup plan if it gets too crazy.
He's not sure when they'll catch a flight home. And for now, they're all just bracing for impact and hoping for the best, knowing the worst of the storm could be here shortly.
We stand with the family. We appreciate you. We love you. And we thank you for sharing him with us.
Yeah, emotional words from a close friend. We are learning new details about the shooting death of William Keith Booker on Jefferson Avenue. Police are now reviewing surveillance footage near the scene as the search for his killer continues. Today, Chase Howell spoke with that longtime friend and co-worker of Booker. A pretty emotional time.
Yeah, Don, RPD officer Moses Robinson was emotional today while talking about his friend of 15 years, Keith Booker. They may have worked at different city schools, but they bonded over the same thing, helping young people. Officer Moses Robinson and retired officer Keith Booker worked as school resource officers with the Rochester Police Department, something Moses says Booker was called to do.
Many kids who are hurt and are struggling, they need people like Booker.
Moses says Booker was a person everyone could turn to, professionally and personally.
The principles of, I believe his life was and is of service, but in particular being a school resource officer, the principles of safety and protection of kids was paramount for him.
In 2017, Booker decided to leave Franklin High School and retire from the police force, dedicating his time to his infant daughter.
There was mainly one reason for his retirement, was that he wanted to spend time with his daughter. And that was hands down. She was absolutely the love of his life.
At the end of our interview, Moses had this message for his friend's young daughter.
When she's old enough to understand, will know and remember that her father loved her. And the standard and the quality of his life for me and so many other people will not be in vain, will not go to waste.
Robinson also tells me Booker was just an honest and all-around good guy, a quality he says people would notice just by his smile.
We are hearing today from one of the first investigators who interviewed now convicted Brighton axe murderer James Krausnak.
It's a first-hand account of the hours following that brutal crime back in 1982. What happened on Del Rio Drive back then is forever etched in the minds of the first responders who were there in the aftermath.
13 Wham's Jackie Napier spoke with one of the original investigators about his reaction to yesterday's guilty verdict. Jackie?
Doug and Jenny, Officer Richard Corrigan spoke to James Krausnak just hours after Kathleen's murder. He's remembered this case for 40 years and says that some of the details will stay with him forever.
For Richard Corrigan, a now retired veteran of the Brighton Police Department, the guilty verdict of James Krausnak offered closure.
They're not here with us, and I wish they were.
He couldn't help but reflect on the colleagues who have passed since the case began 4 decades ago, namely lead detective Ed Broderick and fellow investigator Tom Schrader.
Fortunately, they're both gone, but I hope this is I hope they're happy.
Corrigan testified for the prosecution during James Krausnak's trial. He recounted the first time he met Kathleen's family in Michigan just days after her murder. At the time, he says they had no suspicions.
And you're trying to put together a little biography of this victim, and nothing rose up or red flags came up to indicate who or where we should be looking at.
While in Michigan, Corrigan also interviewed James Krausnak. He recalls Krausnak started yelling when Corrigan brought up what investigators suspected was a staged burglary.
I would call it, as an investigator, the term we use is consciousness of guilt, that we might be getting into something that he didn't want to get into or he knew about.
James Krausnak was stoic when the jury convicted him yesterday.
That's pretty much how he was. When you ask what was his demeanor, what you saw in court is what you got a lot of that early on, 40 years ago.
Now Corrigan believes justice has been served at a great cost. His thoughts now turn to Sarah, the couple's daughter who was 3 years old and left home alone all day with her mother's murdered body.
Sarah has lost her mother, and now she's lost her father. And it's sad for both sides. It's a no-win situation.
Sarah Krausnak sat behind her father during his entire trial. James Krausnak now faces up to 25 years to life in prison when he's sentenced on November 7th.